Hey there, I'm Willow Weston, the founder and director of Collide, and I'm so glad that you decided to hop on today. We host conferences for women so that they can collide with Jesus, and we want to share this past talk from a past conference with you. Hope you enjoy it.
Hello, everybody. I am so excited to share with you tonight. We are going to just jump right on into this and begin by reading from Matthew 14:29 through 31. He said, "Come ahead." Jumping out of the boat, Peter walked on the water to Jesus. But when he looked down at the waves churning beneath his feet, he lost his nerve and began to sink. He cried, "Master, save me." Jesus didn't hesitate. He reached down and grabbed his hand. Then he said, "Faint heart, what got into you?" My hope is that if you are on the edge of the inside of the boat, waiting to walk on water, that you would find the hope and the strength to move towards Jesus, just like Peter did, jumping out of the boat. I know the exhilaration that comes from making big faith moves, like walking on water. And I also know the toll that the storm can take on our faith. How easy it is, like Peter, to take our eyes off Jesus, and how quickly we can sink. Extraordinary living isn't challenge-free, and the reality is that there will be moments when we want to give up. But I want us to be equipped, focused, and ready for those losing your nerve moments so that we don't close the book on our stories when a storm blows in. Peter getting out of the boat and losing his nerve, to me, is a lot like the experience of cliff jumping. And before you think I'm some wild, crazy daredevil type, I've only been a few times, probably on cliffs that are about half as high as I remember them to be. But on the way up to the top of the cliff, this is when you have to pump yourself up. I remember walking up with my friends. We were talking about how epic this was going to be. We were encouraging one another that we were definitely brave enough to do this, and there was nothing to be afraid of. My confidence was growing with every single step. This, to me, feels like the moment when Peter decided that he was going to hop on out of that boat. But then something shifts when you're at the top and you're peering over the edge at the water below. It's the moment I realized that talking about jumping off this cliff on the way up was one thing, but actually jumping would require I tap into another depth of courage and bravery. This part, to me, feels like the losing your nerve stuff that Peter dealt with when he shifted his focus. The monologue with cliff jumping started to sound a lot like this to me. Excuse me, I'm like looking, I was told this was a 6-foot jump, but now it sort of feels like 5 stories high, and then fear comes for you. Like, what if I belly flop? Or I remember hearing about someone that jumped off a cliff and they landed on their tailbone, and I that can't happen to me. And I remember like pointing to my friends and like, was that a shadow over there, or is like the fins of a great white shark? I had no idea. Trust me, there is so much to destroy and distract your focus if you let it. But then you get to a turning point in your story. Will you jump off the edge of the cliff, or are you going to try to find a way to climb back down? You are the one that gets to decide if the risk is worth it. And more times than not, you're going to have to jump afraid. So I decided to jump, and that decision was met with this back and forth tension of terror as I was free falling and screaming as I jumped off the cliff, that then shifted into this adrenaline rush full of excitement about halfway down when I realized I was actually doing this. And then I crashed into the water, and I emerged with a sense of accomplishment that propelled me to want more. And I think in a lot of ways, Peter got this tension. It's a mix of he's so afraid to jump out of the boat, but then he's pumped and excited to be walking on water, and then he's freaking out because the waves are churning beneath his feet. And I get that tension. It's excitement mixed with fear. About 1.5 years ago, I had a pretty big go-ahead moment that I was thrilled about. But when I stepped out of the boat in faith, it was after tears, wrestling with God, and facing my fears. It was this combo of excitement and fear. Not only did I feel that tension, but I was not prepared for the experience after I got out of the boat. I told myself that the waves should not be churning beneath my feet once I took a step of faith. I expected smooth sailing and the storm to calm down. But verse 29 describes how Peter took his eyes off Jesus and focused on the waves churning beneath his feet. And in that moment, according to a few translations, Peter lost his nerve, he became frightened, and he was afraid. And that is exactly what I did. This part of the story feels like some serious real talk. And it's the part I've been resonating the most with lately. I assumed that getting out of the boat was the hardest part, conquering all the fears that held me back, that I didn't expect there would be other storms that I would face outside of the boat, and I did not even consider that I would start sinking like Peter. It was a wake-up call and an unexpected chapter that pushed my faith to the limit, that taught me I will have to step through the storm and the importance of focus. Like I said, about a year and a half ago, I had a pretty big go-ahead moment. For a long time, I felt like I was in the boat, bought into the mission as a disciple, feeling called to ministry. I wanted to use my gifts and talents to help women, and saying small yeses along the way to opportunities that God had put in front of me. But I wasn't sure if this ministry thing was supposed to be a full-time gig or how I would make the leap from my corporate job. The voice inside of me to get out of the boat kept getting louder and louder until I found myself on the edge of the boat, ready to take one of the biggest leaps of my life. And here I was again, equal parts through the roof excited and terrified, because jumping out of the boat brings new potential and opportunities, but also uncertainty when you're stepping out into a storm. Right before I stepped out, I remember drawing this imaginary line and telling God that this type of sacrifice is as far as I could possibly go and nothing more. And to be honest, that actually would have been a big step of faith for me. But as the details of my new adventure continued to unfold, I realized that God was asking me to step far beyond that line that I had drawn. And I didn't think that I had the faith to be stretched that far. I remember thinking, I will get out of the boat in light winds, a little storm, a few rollers. I have the faith to do that. But you are asking me to jump out of the boat in the dead of night with huge waves crashing against the boat. I'm like, I don't have the faith to do that. I remember thinking, Lord, you've got to be kidding me. You know I'm already taking steps that scare me. But then I heard this voice that said, would you be willing to take a few more steps? Which made me cry even harder, because the entire week I'd been listening to this worship song that sang, I'm calling you deep and deeper still. It's one thing to sing that song with confidence in the car, and it's another thing to actually step out and do it. I made a decision that I would take a few more steps toward Jesus and go deeper. One of my devotionals said, you don't have to feel brave to be brave, and that about sums up how I felt. I wasn't feeling brave, but I was confident enough in the voice of the one that was calling me out, and I decided to focus on that. That edge of the boat moment was the day that I told Willow, who was just up here, that I was excited to accept the position at Collide, a position that would plunge me into full-time ministry. I was ready to make the jump. And before we go any further with my story, I want to be clear that these go-ahead moments are not just for people leaving their corporate jobs for full-time ministry. There are countless scenarios and ways that God is calling all of us out of the boat. It's that passion inside of you, the one thing that you know you were created to do, or that stirring that there might be something more for your life. For me, in this season, that looks like full-time ministry. But we all have unique storylines with various purposes and callings in ministry, in the marketplace, in school, and at home that will require we go ahead and step out in faith. It might be your heart for foster care, starting something new after you just retired, fighting against human trafficking, going to counseling, applying to those colleges, making sacrifices in your finances to give back, choosing to fight for your marriage, starting that business, or going back to school. The truth is, whether or not you hear it, feel it, or see it, God has something extraordinary for you to do. So jumping back to my story, just like Peter, I stepped out of the boat. And just like Peter, it did not take me very long to lose my nerve. I'll never forget, a few nights later when the panic started to settle in, when I started to ask myself, what in the world have I done? I remember tears started streaming down my face as I started to go through all the ways my life would change. The panic started with I'll be making half as much money, no benefits, and no health care. I was taking some things I held very tightly to, like my security, my stability, and my job title. And I was letting go of that and saying, Lord, I trust that you'll provide if I step out, but I had no idea how he would do it. And I started listening to other voices that told me this move was a mistake. I was crazy to take the job. Why would you take a step back in your career like that? And it wasn't just other voices, it was mine too. It started with, God, seriously? I told you I did not want to be in ministry until I was married. And now I'm single in women's ministry. Are you serious? How am I supposed to meet a dude with only women around? Maybe you could have sent me somewhere with more mixed company. The voices in my head kept saying, you think you're called to help people, but don't you remember how imperfect you are? Or you think preaching might be for you? Think again. You're not smart enough, good enough, secure enough, or talented enough. And that's what the storm sounded like in my mind. I felt like I was out of the boat in the middle of the storm. Huge waves are crashing over me, spilling salt water into my eyes, and the wind is blowing so hard that it's threatening to topple me over. My eyes are stinging, I'm choking on salt water, and I can't really see through the fog. I remember in that moment feeling like Peter walking on the water, and I cried out, I don't need to see all of you, Jesus, right now in this storm. But even if it's just your finger, I will know that I'm headed in the right direction, and I will stay out here. But I am freaking out about my finances, and if I'm even called to ministry. Within 30 minutes, I remember getting a text from one of my sisters. And she said how proud she was of me and my decision to pursue and make sacrifices for what God was calling me to. And she said that her and her husband would want to help me financially in the transition. And the next morning I was at church and a woman came up to me and she said, you don't know me, but I heard you preach last summer and I want to let you know that you have a gift and a calling and God's going to use your story to impact women. That for me was a moment in the storm when Jesus reached out his hand. And with those two small reminders, I knew I was headed in the right direction and I could focus on that. The reality is that we will all face storms and churning waves beneath our feet in different seasons as we pursue what God is calling us to, and that is why we must fight for our focus. And that means we are going to need how to learn to cultivate a steadfast focus so that storms don't completely take us out. Because your story, which started over here, is a bold, scary, exciting step of faith, can quickly transition into a meltdown in the middle of the storm that leaves you feeling resentful, confused, disappointed, and disillusioned. This is what happens when our focus isn't set in the right place. Storms can be unexpected, unfamiliar, uncomfortable, and unpredictable. They will test your resolve and focus, getting you to question if you were called to this extraordinary life at all. It will push your faith to the limit. And storms come in all shapes and sizes with different levels of severity. A storm can look like unexpected changes in your circumstances, a hardship you didn't ask for, a setback, or unforeseen road bumps. It might be when you're facing another downturn battle with depression, struggling through fear and anxiety and panic attacks, or maybe it happened in the middle of a rejection that ended in a breakup or betrayal that ended in divorce. In the middle of an injury or battling an illness. It might be the pushback from everyone around you that jumping out of the boat is absolutely crazy. Or maybe it's in a back and forth season of waiting and disappointment for something you've been hoping for a really long time. It could be an addiction that is begging you to come back. It might be that pile of non-acceptance letters from colleges on your desk or another job offer you didn't get. It could just as easily be distractions, like social media scrolling and swiping, too much Pinterest, too many comparisons, binging on TV shows and videos. We must fight to not lose focus of why we were called out of the boat when we face a storm. Staying focused requires intentionality. It's something we have to cultivate and grow. And we're going to dive into some ways to strengthen our focus in a little bit. Even though this losing your nerve business kind of came as an unexpected chapter for me, I've been reminded that this is not the fine print stuff that Jesus forgot to tell us about. He's upfront and clear from the beginning that if you want to follow after me, you're going to have to deny yourself and pick up your cross. And if we look forward to the book of James, James says, "Consider it pure joy when you face trials of many kinds, because the testing of your faith produces perseverance." Does that mean that storms are fun? No, they suck, and they make you want to quit. Who likes losing their nerve out in the middle of the storm when a bunch of people who are cozy in the boat are watching? Not me. But knowing that there will be seasons of storms allows us to not be caught off guard when they blow in. Storms require that we step up our game and fight, which is another reason why I decided to use the word fight in the title of this talk. Because that's what finding hope again feels like after losing it. It feels like a fight to find your focus when there are 1,000,001 things distracting you. It's a fight to not lose perspective of where you're headed. It's a fight to not lose your worth and your value when the storm is raging around you, when anxiety settles in, depression is knocking at the door, and burnout is creeping in, and all the reasons that you got out of the boat in the first place don't make sense anymore. A fight requires energy, perseverance, and stamina. It might feel like it took all the faith that you had to get out of the boat. So how could you possibly muster the faith to face another storm? A famous boxer once said, "Fight one more round." When your feet are so tired that you have to shuffle back to the center of the ring, fight one more round. When your arms are so tired that you can hardly lift your hands to come on guard, fight one more round. We can fight one more round. We can put one foot in front of the other and fight for our focus even when the waves are churning beneath our feet. We can fight for our focus in uncertainty. Recently, it's been a rough few stormy months for me out of the boat, as I've battled anxiety, grief, and moments of hopelessness. I wanted to get back in the boat, and I was like, "God, I'm going back, and don't even try to stop me. I'm going to get in the boat, I'm going to lie down, I'm going to curl up, fall asleep, and quit." And as I was trying to get my bearings over the past few months, I realized that this was going to be an all-out fight for my focus. And it's not just a fight for your focus when you're going through a storm, but it's wise counsel to prepare and train for future fights that you might face out of the boat. And as I began to study more about focus, I realized how foundational it is for our faith. Did you know that humans do not have the ability to walk in a straight line from one point to the next without a focal point in the distance to reference? We will straight up walk in circles around and around. They did studies where they blindfolded people and they put them in a field and they asked them to walk across the field from one end to the other. And without a focal point, these people ended up walking in circles, making it no closer to their destination than when they started. The same was even true when they had people drive across that field. They ended up in circles. It's an interesting phenomena and very applicable to our spiritual lives because without a focal point, it's not likely we're getting out of the boat and it's not likely we're going to stay out of the boat. Peter got his focus right when his focus was on Jesus, but he sank when his focus shifted to the waves. The only thing moving me forward in my story is a steadfast focus on Jesus. It's what gives me clarity and purpose in the fog. It gives me peace when I'm scared, and it's the reminder that I am not alone. I want to move into some strategies and concepts that will help us stay focused on Jesus that have been very useful to me as I've been learning to fight for my focus in real time. There are days when I actively see this stuff helping my focus, and there are other days it doesn't feel like it's making a difference. In many ways, it feels like going to the gym and working out. You're not going to see progress necessarily on day 1 or 2, and there will be days when you're at the gym and it feels like no gains are happening. But the fact that you're showing up and doing the work is actually building your focus and strength whether or not you feel it. So I have 3 things. The first one is Jesus prepared in advance, and so should we. Jesus was diligent about getting time alone with the Father, and I think that's where his ability to stand strong in the face of a storm was derived from. We see Jesus doing just that a few verses before when he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. Jesus was uncompromising in taking this time, and it was essential for his ministry. I'm not certain it's possible to maintain a steadfast focus on Jesus if you're not taking the time to get away with him. It's kind of like a new relationship. You can't expect to trust someone that you hardly know, but the more time you spend with them, the more the trust grows, and the more you're able to recognize that voice as a person and someone you can trust on and rely on. Peter was out of the boat in the middle of the storm and recognized Jesus' voice because he knew who was calling him. So let's start by clearing out some space, by less social media, less Netflix, less comparing, less scrolling, less being busy, less of whatever it is that is causing you to get all sorts of distracted and connect with Jesus. Here are a few examples, but find something that works for you. Try fasting or giving something up. Try quiet time, go on a walk or a hike, listen to encouraging sermons or podcasts, pray, journal, read through the Psalms, set an alarm on your phone as a reminder to reset your focus. In a storm, spiritual amnesia is a real thing. We forget the ways that God has shown up for us in the past, and one of the things that has been so helpful for me is writing down moments of God's provision in the moment, because it serves as a marker for my faith in the future when I'm weathering a storm. It's these small steps that will help us refuel and refresh our vision. When I make time to get away with Jesus, it is not only healing balm for my soul, but it also produces clarity. It builds a source of strength that I can draw on in hard times, and it trains my brain to recognize and focus on the voice of the one calling me out. Number 2, take the time to reflect. It's easy for me to enter into a place of shame, embarrassment, and frustration when I lose my nerve in the storm and start sinking. Jesus' response to Peter is one full of love, care, and compassion. Jesus isn't ticked at Peter. He's not rolling his eyes, laughing at him, or taking a video that they'll turn into a meme that will go viral later. No, Jesus is responding in a loving and caring way. A response like the one that Jesus gave Peter allows me to take a deep breath and give myself some grace. We should all be a little less critical of our sinking moments and instead do some compassionate reflection. In verse 31, Jesus asks Peter, "Faint heart, what got into you?" With this question, Jesus is inviting Peter into a tough but loving conversation about why he sank. Jesus wants good things for Peter, and he knows the right questions to ask so that the next time Peter is out walking on water or facing something scary or difficult, he won't sink like he did last time. Jesus is equipping and empowering Peter to stand strong. It's important that we have these conversations with Jesus too, because these reflective conversations can help us get at the root of what's holding us back. It sharpens our focus and builds our strength for next time. Number 3, reframe how you see the storm. Reframing the storm began with me understanding that storms are normal, sinking is okay, and at some point or another, I am going to want to give up. I also learned that I'm not alone, and we all face storms. Storms can quickly feel isolating. I'm the only one going through this. Everyone else seems to be getting by storm-free, and storms aren't normal for people who follow Jesus. Once I broke down these misconceptions that I had about storms, I was able to land at a place where I realized that whatever storm was blowing in had not caught God by surprise, and that a series of stormy chapters would not define the entirety of my story. Then I had to reframe how I viewed the purpose of the storm, going from the storm is going to destroy me to perhaps this storm could be used to grow something inside of me that God could use to help bring hope and healing to other people in a similar storm. I realized that having faith in a storm produces something inside of me that we cannot get from the comfort of the boat. Think wine or olive oil. We don't get wine without crushing the grapes, and we don't get olive oil without pressing the olives in harsher weather conditions. Diamonds are created under pressure, and the eagle will not fly unless it's pushed out of the nest. C.S. Lewis once said, "Hardships often prepare ordinary people for extraordinary destiny." I will say, it is not always easy to believe that you will make it out of the storm when you are in the thick of it. But I have learned that I can trust the outcome and believe that there is hope on the other side of the storm because Jesus was out in the storm first, and he's out there ready to help us. In many ways, I think this is what gives Jesus the right to ask us to follow his lead and jump out of the boat, because he knows the magnitude of what he's asking us to do. We are not focusing on a God who was unable to relate to what it feels like to face difficult, trying, or painful times. Jesus faced storms of rejection, betrayal, grief after losing a friend. He was tempted to the max. He was tired and exhausted, and he ultimately lost his life. He stayed connected to God. He focused on his calling and fulfilled his purpose, from miracles on earth to ultimately defeating death and setting us right with God. My ability to persevere in a storm and keep a firm grip on hope is directly tied to focusing on the one who is out in the storm with me. And even in the middle of the storms, we are guaranteed this rock-solid, foolproof, anchored hope in Jesus, just like it says in Isaiah 43. Do not fear, for I have redeemed you. I have summoned you by name, you are mine. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and when you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. When you walk through the fire, you will not be burned. The flames will not set you ablaze. My Finnish grandpa passed away 2 weeks ago, and his whole life, he always talked about something the Finnish people call Sisu. Sisu is a special strength and a persistent resolve to continue to overcome in the moment of adversity. It's a combination of stamina, perseverance, courage, and determination held in reserve for hard times. He always told us that we have Sisu running through our blood and that it's something that we could draw on, even like he did, even in the toughest of times. And he faced his fair share of tragedy and hardship in this life, and that this Sisu would get us through anything we might face. As I've been thinking a lot about this Sisu stuff lately, I realize that that is what Jesus offers us. And that's what we get when we focus on him. We have access to all of this, and the highs and the lows, the good times and bad, the calm seas and the stormy seas. I pray that you keep making brave moves out of the boat. Keep fighting hard for your focus and discover the clarity and strength that only comes from fixing your eyes on Jesus, because you are being called to go ahead into an extraordinary life. Let's pray. God, we thank you so much for the ways that you're calling us to be brave and courageous and step out of the boat. And God, I pray that we would learn to cultivate a steadfast focus so that whenever storms blow in, we are ready and equipped to stand strong and to continue to follow after you. We love you so much, and we're grateful to be able to partner with you in our extraordinary life. Amen.